I'm gonna take the question of intersectionality and interpret it very broadly. So in a different way than it was yesterday. I'm gonna say there are multiple forces in complex systems that may be joining together to create issues such as discrimination. And much like in traditional view of intersectionality, where you may want to disentangle which one is playing a role, what I want to do is to see whether we can disentangle which of the forces may be playing a role in creating discrimination. And I'm going to use as my example for all of this advertising. And the reason I'm going to focus on advertising is threefold. First, advertising does shape access to opportunities. It lets people know what exists and what doesn't exist. Second of all, it's a system where, the principles at play are very similar to the ones that are at play in organic content, such as search and recommendations and newsfeed rankings. And third of all, it's a system that we can actually relatively easily study for the questions of disentangling what the forces are, which is much harder to do for organic content. And let me just tell you very briefly about ad delivery process. So the way ads work today, there's kind of three players. There's the advertisers who choose to select a target audience and say, well, I want the males who are 35 and above who are educated at Harvard. There's the advertisers who choose the ad creative, so like the picture or the video that they're gonna show, and who choose the amount of money that they want to spend. And then there is the delivery algorithm that for every user who comes online on the platform decides which of the many ads that are trying to reach that user is actually going to see. And the way they decided is through a complex process that takes into account many things, such as the bids of the advertiser, but also things like which users will be online later, and what does this user like and don't like, and so forth. And so let me look at this very concretely and ask, is job ad delivery in current systems discriminatory? Right? And in order to address, if it is discriminatory, in order to address, we first have to prove that it is discriminatory. We can't just hypothesize and say, hey, Facebook, hey, Google, go fix it. We hypothesize it's discriminatory. We need to know whether it actually is. So say I'm an advertiser, and say I just run a job ad without any targeting by gender for a software engineer. And say I observe that most of the applications I get from this job ad are from men. Well, why could this be? Does this mean that their job ad delivery is discriminatory? No, maybe not. Because it could be that there's just a force of more men use the platform than women. And therefore, it's natural that if I advertise on this platform, I will get more applications from men. Or there could be an economic force that in general, women are more expensive on this platform. For example, because many more advertisers are trying to reach women, kind of like in the examples Cynthia presented last week. And then this is again, not the ad platform's fault, this is economics, right? It could be that there's also the force of there's something wrong with my ad, right? Maybe the images in my ad are somehow more appealing to men than to women. And so even though the platform is showing my ad both to men and to women equally, more men are engaging. Or it could be that, the job that I'm advertising, there's simply a difference in the underlying populations, and there's more qualified men for this job. Right? So there's all these other explanations of these other forces that are at play that could explain away this observation. And of course, there's a potential explanation that, the ad delivery algorithm is explicitly steering the ad to men. But in order to prove which of these forces is really at play, you have to do something. And so the fact that there's many forces at play, such as the advertisers, how much the advertisers are bidding, what the platform's business interests are, differences in platform usage, and so forth, has been understood for many years now. And the first hypothesis that it's not just economic forces, that it's not just the image and so forth, actually dates back to LaTanya Sweeney's work in 2013. But that's just a hypothesis. It's not enough to hypothesize, because the platforms are inclined to explain this away with innocuous other explanations that don't blame them. So what we set out to do is we set out to disentangle all these forces. And to do that, we became an advertiser and jumped a lot of various hoops that I'm not going to go into details of. Well, let me say that, eventually we got to the following situation, where we could run 2 simultaneous ads targeting a gender and race-balanced audience. These ads had the same budget, coming from the same page, running at the same time, and the only difference in these ads is literally what job they are advertising. The one on the left-hand side is advertising the lumberjack job. The one on the right-hand side is advertising a cleaning job. By running these ads simultaneously, we can control for factors like differences in the rate of usage of the platform, or differences in how much reaching women costs versus reaching men costs. Because both of these ads are experiencing it at the same way, in the same form, right? So if the algorithm is non-discriminatory and the forces at play are really at play, we don't expect the ads to deliver 50-50 to men and women. But we expect them to skew in the same way, because those factors like differences in costs are controlled for. But that's not what we see. What we see is that the lumberjack ad goes to 92% male, 80% white audience, and the cleaning job ad goes to 90% female, 65% black audience. Now, there is still yet another objection that you could say that maybe the algorithm is not discriminating. And this objection is qualifications. What if the algorithm is just so smart that it picks up on the fact that, among the audience that we targeted, there is more white males who are qualified for the lumberjack job than black females. And actually, qualifications is an excusable control of skew according to US law. So now, to disentangle that part, we need another trick to control for qualifications. And we were able to do that too. The way we did that is we found 2 pairs of job positions that have similar qualification requirements, but have a de facto gender skew in the real world. So specifically, Domino's, which is a pizza company, and Instacart, which is a grocery service, both need drivers to deliver the stuff. And the drivers have the same qualifications. You can look at the job postings and what those two companies ask for. But it just happens that in the real world, Domino's drivers are mostly male and Instacart drivers are mostly female. So what we do is we run ads for these two positions, again, targeting the same audience, balanced, and observe the results. And now, if there's a relative difference in delivery, we know that it's not justifiable by differences in qualifications. We know that, for some reason the algorithm is steering the ads according to historical data or whatever this may be. And actually we did it on both Facebook and LinkedIn, and we found out that indeed Facebook is steering Instacart ads to women and Domino's ads to men in a statistically significant way. And LinkedIn is not, or at least we were not able to find a statistically significant effect. And you can say, well, maybe delivery drivers is just one job, but we repeated it for other types of jobs and the result is the same. So for instance, for software engineering jobs, where Netflix has de facto more women software engineers than NVIDIA, Facebook steers the software engineering ads to women for Netflix and to men for NVIDIA. And you can think also from the perspective of the advertiser, right? I'm an advertiser, I'm trying to diversify my workforce. And look what the algorithm is doing. It's steering me back to my currently biased demographic. Right? So this is an example of how we were able to disentangle the role of the many factors in ad delivery and really point to the algorithm chosen by Facebook as being discriminatory. But I want to note that essentially it took 8 years to go from the hypothesis to an actual proof that it is discriminatory. And now you could say, well, now that we have the proof, now the companies are starting to act. So last month, Facebook had a settlement with the Department of Justice where they said, oh, we don't acknowledge that our thing has problems, but we're gonna, work on making our ad delivery algorithm less discriminatory. Right? So it's a challenge. This disentangling things is a big challenge. It's creativity, effort, and so forth, intensive. Let me talk now about a different domain where disentangling is possibly just as important. And this domain is political advertising. So Jeremy Merrill, who's a journalist, now he's, I think, a freelance journalist, wrote an article based on the data released by the Facebook political ads library that simply calculated how much did Joe Biden pay per 1,000 users in swing states versus how much Donald Trump paid per 1,000 users in swing states prior to the 2020 election. And you can see the numbers. Joe Biden paid almost twice as much. And of course, when he published this article, this can again be explained by various things, like maybe there's fewer Democrats on the platform than Republicans. Maybe the Democrats in general are more expensive to reach. Maybe Donald Trump's targeting campaign was smarter, which allowed him to get the vote out at cheaper rates. And actually, in fact, the Trump campaign's manager, when he saw this article by Jeremy, that was his main tweet. Yeah, we are doing much better because we're smarter about how we reach our voters. So this is another example where we want to understand which of the factors is at play. Is it really kind of objective reality and campaign managers being smarter on one side than on the other side? Or is it Facebook's algorithm that is putting its thumb on the scale and saying, well, you know what? It should cost this candidate more than this other candidate. So we were actually able to do that too. And here's our a simple example. Create 4 different ads. Both of them just advertising the American flag and saying register to vote. So it's not political to the extent that any political ad can be non-political. And then vary the targeting. We're going to target liberals or conservatives using Facebook's tools. And for real users, we're always going to show the landing page as USA.gov, which is a government website about elections. But for the Facebook crawler that is evaluating our ads during the campaign, we're going to vary where it goes. So for the Facebook crawler, in 2 cases, we're going to show that it goes to the Bernie Sanders page, and in 2 cases, we're going to show that it goes to the Trump page. So to individuals, all of these ads look exactly the same. To the Facebook machine learning algorithm, this is not the same. 2 of the ads go to Sanders page, 2 of the ads go to Trump page. And the reason we use Sanders here is at the time when we ran these experiments, he was spending much more than Joe Biden on Facebook. What do we see? We see that the ad with a Sanders landing page delivers more to liberal users than to conservative users. We also see that it costs 1.4 times as much for the Sanders ad to reach the same number of users in the conservative audience as for the Trump ad. And now this is purely the effect of the algorithm. Because from the user perspective, these ads are all the same and neutral. Right? This is Facebook putting its thumb on the scale and saying, oh, this is a Sanders ad, it's reaching a conservative audience, it should cost more than if this is a Trump ad trying to reach the exact same audience. And you could say, well, this is a contrived example, but then we reproduced it with real campaigns, and we found that what essentially ends up happening is even when a candidate is trying to reach an ideologically diverse audience, Facebook steers the ads towards the aligned users, the ones that Facebook thinks are already aligned with the campaign, and there's really no way around it. So even if the campaign actively says, well, I'm Bernie Sanders, but I want to reach conservative users, and that's what I'm bidding at, if you compare what's going to happen when Bernie Sanders does that versus when Trump does that, Trump's ads are going to deliver more to conservative users, even when everything is the same, the budget is the same, the targeting is the same, everything is the same, and it's going to be more expensive to the candidate to reach users who don't share the campaign's views, up to, in some cases, up to a factor of 4. So really what's happening here is if 2 candidates have the same amount of money and want to reach the same users, They cannot if they have different beliefs, because the algorithm is going to charge one of the candidates more, and it's going to sub-select which of the users they're actually going to be reaching. And now we can say, well, this is a very simplistic view, right? We're just looking at liberal versus conservative. Now let's go into the more traditional notion of intersectionality and say, well, which ones among the liberals are they reaching? Right? Are they reaching, the white or the black, or only the women, or only the men? How is it spread by socioeconomic status? We can't really do that with current tools, but that's the natural next question, right? Like Facebook's putting its thumb on the scale on the political conversation. We know that it's doing that for political beliefs. Where else is it doing that? In what other domains is it doing that? So now and there's a wonderful study out of Stanford and Duke that tried to kind of dig deeper and actually partner with a local government and say, our goal is to reach a demographically diverse audience. I don't have time to describe it in detail. I encourage you to read it. But basically, their conclusion was that no matter what you try, you can't. Or you have to make trade-offs that are non-Pareto optimal in some way. So now, in conclusion, I think I have more questions than answers, much like some of the speakers in this workshop. I want to say that in some cases, we now can disentangle the role of these multiple forces, but we can do it in a very narrow context. And it's creativity intensive, it's data intensive, like we have to use private data in order to get at these things. And really what we need as the next step is new paradigms that would facilitate public interest researchers and journalists and researchers' ability to study these complex systems and disentangle what may be at play. And there are some beginnings of this beginning to emerge in regulations, such as European Digital Services Act that just passed, or the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act that is in proposal to Congress right now in the US. But that's just the beginning. And I think we need more and new paradigms for this kind of work, including paradigms where the platforms themselves would be supporting this kind of research and enabling independent scrutiny of disentangling the multiple forces. So I leave you with that, and happy to chat further. Thanks.